All right, so I thought I would start today. I've met some of you, but not all of you, and I know also this will be recorded or is being recorded. So I thought I would start just with a really brief introduction, and I'll move from that into a few comments on the topic, really intended to open a discussion. I have shared, as you'll see on today's topic, really my personal experiences, but I would be very happy to use those as a jumping off point for further discussion. So a quick bit of background on how I ended up at University of Delaware. I grew up in East Lansing, Michigan, as part of a kid of an academic family, one of those strange people who thinks about being a professor from birth for no reason other than that her dad was one. I went to Princeton and I majored in chemical engineering. I got a PhD at Carnegie Mellon, also in chemical engineering, though then focusing on designing materials for gene delivery. I did a postdoc in matrix biology at UW and the Benaroya Research Institute, and I've been at Delaware since 2006. While there, as I'll show you on the next slide, have really loved the experience of connecting with colleagues and beginning to grow my career in research and teaching. I thought I would share too that at the same time then, as you see on the bottom, have cultivated a number of interests and especially investment in family and other things ideally done then with family, so running, music, hiking outdoors, and travel. And so this is really the only snapshot on sort of research and other activities that I'm currently working on at Delaware and externally. You'll see in the upper left, my research program is focused in the design of new materials inspired by nature that are used for drug delivery, especially gene delivery, RNA delivery, and protein delivery. I also have been invested in leadership in both the research and administrative contexts, and I won't go through all those details, but as some examples, I'm directing the core of the new Delaware Center for Musculoskeletal Research, COBRE, chaired the ECI Nanotech and Medicine Conference, have study section experience, as well as the administrative experience within my department and university that you see at the upper right. And I think then the lower right sort of box has been where I'll jump off from on today's talk, which is that another thing that means a great deal to me personally and that I've invested in throughout my career is really thinking about ways to promote diversity, access, and mentoring in STEM and towards leadership. And so I'll use that then to open the talk. Again, I built this really around my own experiences of trying to navigate a career as a woman in science, and really sort of things that came to my mind when I was trying to write this talk yesterday. I don't have a slide deck for this talk, and so it gave me a really nice opportunity to think carefully about what would be my tips for success based on personal perspectives. And some of these are well beyond sort of, being a woman in science and are more about being in this career in academia. And so I'll go through these and then I want to expand on some of them in the next couple of slides as well to talk a little bit about the context and how it's mattered to me to be a woman as I navigate an academic career. But I think there's a couple things, and so some tips for success that I found myself building and developing are, first of all, time management, and this is going to come up twice. Actually, it's my first and also my second tip for success. So a couple of comments there. I found, I think this is true across the board in academia, but I think it especially can tend to impact people who are in a minority in one way or another, that you're asked to do many things and you're going to want to do many things and you have to be on top of choosing what you do. And so I think of time management in two boxes. The first is shown here. This is really the very short-term time management about being in charge of my time every day, which is something I'm still working on. But here I would say some tips for success are knowing how you work best. For me, it's been about building actively in my calendar a schedule that reflects me blocking time to write when I write best, and me blocking time for meetings when I can, at times when I may be
Yeah.
busy
Hey, how are you?
in terms of the creative thought. Other things, I think setting boundaries and sticking with them and not apologizing for them. So I'll sprinkle in examples as I go, but for me, one of the times when I thought about this carefully was when I had very young children, and I found myself feeling guilty and wanting to apologize when I had to leave early for example, the Halloween parade. And I think I've learned over the past 16 years in this career that that we get to pick our own boundaries and pick our own things that we want to invest in. And so I think that's a clear tip for success on your daily and larger picture schedule. Also, in terms of work-life balance, doing something for you that's just for you daily, even if it's a half an hour that you do yoga, you go for a run, you sit down with your family and do a game, whatever it is. Bigger picture time management is, I think, a longer term proposition. And this is something that I have thought more about in the past couple of years, but really starting to define for myself in a regular fashion what are both my current portfolio of things I'm investing in and what are my career goals, and are those two things aligned? And if they aren't, then it's time to start managing gradually the investment that you're putting into one bin versus another, and putting it more towards the balance that aligns with your career goals. So I do this in part by putting time aside every couple of months on my calendar for a self check-in, and also from working with a career coach to help me do that. I think another piece of this sort of active management is going to be short-term decision making that will impact that larger portfolio. And so this is the second bullet: stop and think before saying yes. And while this is something maybe we've heard many times, a way that I found useful to think about this is that there isn't a give on your time without a take. And so if you choose to do one more review of another article, you can do that, but that 3 hours is 3 hours less you'll be spending with your family or on your research or on something else. And so you have to make an active choice about what you're giving away in order to do that new thing. I think a really helpful way to self-check on time management, and also to really, I think, make the career more fun and more effective in many different ways, is establishing really diverse mentoring and support networks. And I think this includes really sort of strengthening your relationships with a variety of people. This can include senior mentors. For me, it's been really important to have external mentors, and by external, that can be out of your institution, it can be out of your immediate departmental unit. But really people who you can go to get a sense for the broader perspective on what you're experiencing, and whether it is something specific to where you are, or whether this is something more general. And finally, peer mentors, and really just that social network of friends, people who can share experiences with you and help you to realize that you're not the only one who's going through X, Y, or Z. Last couple things I'll sort of comment on as tips for success, and then shift into a little bit more in terms of my perspectives on the gender aspect of this. Number 4 is investing in making the place you work better. And this starts to touch on things that I've discovered I can do, in part because I have recognized how my perspectives are unique as a woman in science, and the other things that I am. Learning how I can own the things that I do really well, and coming back to point 2 about portfolio and career goals, starting to recognize that I can actively invest in things that I can uniquely impact and that I really care about. A couple of other things I found I have to work on for myself, and those are reminding myself frequently that it is not my responsibility to fix everything. Certainly I need to take responsibility, but that there's not a need to apologize for everything, including things that don't stop at your feet. And also that it is okay to disagree. You can do this politely and respectfully, but avoiding disagreement and avoiding conflict are typically not going to be strategies for effective leadership and advancement. And so then addressing sort of to round out my more prepared comments, things related to being a woman in science. And I think I'll just say from a really personal standpoint that this is something that I have become aware of really gradually over my career, and especially over the past 5 years or so. For me, it's been transitioning into leadership roles that has caused me to do some introspection on this topic. And I think what I've found useful is that raising my own awareness of how being a woman in science impacts all of us, or any of us who are in this role, and also recognizing and putting effort into ways that it enables me. And so a couple of comments, and then I'll share some of the external research, some of the things that for me have been awareness raising in a really useful way. I think for me, it's been helpful to train myself to understand the research on sexism and bias and how they impact women in the workplace. This for me has been a really powerful strategy to depersonalize things I experience and realize that they aren't me. I think some other comments that I would make on this topic are approaching challenges with a constructive mindset. And on this point, I'll go back to point 3, the last couple of words I didn't explicitly address before, which is establishing mentoring and support networks full of positive people. I've had some incredibly positive external and senior and peer mentors, and that's been one of the things that I've really tried to take away from my interactions with them, that really I think the most beneficial and helpful ways to address experiences that one has that may be a result of bias or sexism are to think about ways to fix them and to constructively share those ideas with others. And that gets to this last point of giving back and using experiences to help others. So before I close the talk, I have a few additional slides to share that go beyond sort of these tips and really address this last topic of sharing a little bit of my own awareness raising on what it means to be a woman in science. And so now I'm transitioning into presenting research that is not my own, but that I've found really useful to know about. For me, it's been really thinking, and I'll use this photo to introduce it, but really thinking about what are the impacts. This is obviously a picture of the U.S. government, not of women or scientists. But what does it mean to be steeped in a culture where there is not sufficient diversity and that leadership and powerful positions are not held by people who look like me? And so I'll make a few comments here. First is one study that I found particularly helpful thinking about the culture for women in science and for leadership for women in science is one that was done by a mother and daughter team, Joan Williams and her daughter, and Rachel Dempsey, I should have said. I won't go through in detail each of these things other than to comment on defining what they are. What you'll see that I've put here are 4 well-documented patterns of bias faced by women based on the analysis from Dr. Williams and Dr. Dempsey. This was based on review of multiple hundreds of social psychology studies and their own interviews. And they came up with these 4 patterns of bias, which really resonated for me. The green text is a few, some of these are comments that I have heard myself, others are comments that I have heard from others, but experiences or ways that you might see these types of bias patterns coming into your work life. But what are these things? And so just briefly, prove it again is the idea that because many people in high-level jobs are men, women are then typically seen to not be as good of a fit. And so women are asked and often must provide more evidence of competence in order to be seen as equally competent. The tightrope is the idea that jobs are often seen, even if we don't think about it, as requiring masculine qualities, particularly leadership roles. Women are expected to be feminine, and those two things are not thought of in the same bin. And so you end up caught as a woman in science, for example, in a sort of catch-22, where if you're seen too feminine, you are going to be liked but not respected. And if you're seen as too masculine, you may be respected but not liked. Last two, tug of war is the idea that women's then strategies for navigating this situation and these studies happen to be based in business, but many apply to science, that many of the strategies that we employ for navigating these patterns can come into conflict. So for example, if one woman is attempting to navigate the world by employing sort of strategies of acting more masculine, whereas others may be attempting to act more approachable, one can get into the tug of war where the woman who is more approachable starts to say, well, no wonder no one wants to work with her, and the assertive one might be saying, well, no wonder no one takes her seriously. So women, without planning to sort of working against each other. Finally, the maternal wall is the idea that as women have children, often they are seen as less committed and less competent. This is a particularly powerful one, and I'll cite just a couple quick statistics, which are that in comparative studies between two candidates with identical resumes, except that one resume had 4 words, membership in the PTA, and the other one did not, that those 4 words can result in then impacts that include a 79% less likely chance of being hired, a half as likely chance of being promoted, 11,000 less in salary if you're in business, and then again, that idea of being held to a higher standard. So some really significant and real and documented consequences. And I think my point here is not to be negative, but really to say that if you don't recognize these patterns, you will internalize the idea that you lack the qualities of being a leader. And so last thing, and I know I'm just out of time here, but I think another useful study has been this sort of reframing of the leaky pipeline concept that we're familiar with. This is a more recent analysis and comment from Kathleen Grogan in an article from 2018 in Nature, Ecology, and Evolution. The citation is here, and I won't again read all of the sort of pieces of this puzzle, but I think the point here is that there are structural factors that are causing leak. And so the idea of a leaky pipeline cannot put then the onus on women for causing the leaky pipeline when, for example, startup funds for male PIs may be $500,000 less on average than startup funds for female PIs, as one example. And so finally, before going back to some tips, I think these are really important topics to think about right now. There's plenty of immediately emerging evidence suggesting that women in science are suffering from potentially lasting career damage from COVID-19. So I think that there are many important things for us to be thinking about in our academic communities as to how we take the next steps forward as we, I hope, come out of the pandemic. And so I'll end coming back to this slide of tips for success. I think I would be happy to talk further about these. This was what I've come to after, I think a good bit of thought on these topics over the past years of my own career. And so that's all I had for formal sort of comments. I'm going to end the formal section there and would be happy to open the floor if there's any time from anyone who wants to stay for questions. So thanks.